Paper choice has a big impact on the result of your calligraphy. Successful calligraphy is going to be the result of marrying the right ink to the right paper, and there are so many paper and ink possibilities that it can be confusing and overwhelming. Let's explore how Pilot Parallel Pen ink works on various papers. Usually, one of the first challenges calligraphy students encounter is bleed, which is when the ink spreads from your pen stroke and feathers out into the page. The red ink that comes with the Pilot Parallel Pen is especially prone to bleed, so we'll use it for this demonstration. It is not my favorite ink, so I use it up when I practice. Let's zoom in and look at 4 papers that you might logically try. The first would be cardstock. It would make sense to head out to your favorite art supply store and pick up some cardstock or pre-cut cards and assume you can create something fabulous on it. And probably to your disappointment, you will find out it usually bleeds quite badly. Another one that you would expect to work would be paper for pens. But I have bought so many papers under this description only to be very disappointed. Some might work, but I no longer buy paper for pens. Office bond, something you might have around your house, might actually be better than the 2 above, depending on the quality that you have. But it is still not great, and yet I sometimes use it for practice anyways. I know it is going to bleed a little bit, but since it's just practice, that's okay. Pastel paper, often it starts out looking as if it's going to be great. Notice the fine, thin line that I got right there. But with a little bit of time, this red ink will bleed. You can see it starting to bleed right there. It's okay there where there's not much ink laid down, but where the ink is heavier, it does bleed. Some inks do well on this pastel paper, but not the red. So what can you use? Let's look at some paper possibilities. My paper suggestions, what I've found to work best, are in the class notes. Here are 4 of those papers, and we'll make the same mark with the same ink. This is bleed-proof marker paper. Sometimes you might see it labeled as 100% rag marker paper, and you'll see that it takes the pen quite nicely. It is also translucent, which is great for this class. Premium inkjet paper, this is what I commonly use for practice, and I'm going to recommend you use in this class. You may find it bleeds occasionally, a tiny bit, but really it is quite minimal, and certainly for practice it is just a convenient and affordable paper to use. Clairefontaine is a fine French paper, and it is just a dream to work on. It's a beautiful paper and a really bright white. You can even pool the ink up quite heavily, and it won't spread out into the paper. It will stay contained within your mark. You can also get really great fine hairlines, and they stay crisp and clean. It's just great to work on. Another great paper is your hot press watercolor paper. Of course, it is too expensive for everyday use, but it will give you beautiful thin hairlines and crisp edges. It is what I use for commissions. I look for lighter weights so I can see guidelines through it. We will be using guidelines in this class, and you'll find those as printable PDF attachments in the class project window. I've set it up so you have 2 choices. You'll notice that I have provided guidelines both as a dark version and also as a lighter version. Your first option is to print the lighter version on premium inkjet paper, and then you can work directly on the page, writing over top of the light guides. Your second option is to use the dark guidelines with the translucent paper. Bleed-proof marker papers come in different levels of transparency. Look for the one that works for you. This Copic bleed-proof marker paper is a really nice paper. It's not that translucent, but you can see through it. Then there is the Bienfang rag marker paper, which is much more translucent. Another option is to look around your house and see if you have some good quality tracing paper. Canson makes a tracing paper that doesn't bleed too much. You know, and even if it does bleed slightly, we are practicing. So you don't have to use your best papers for practice. Use what you have around. Depending where you live, you may have different papers available. Don't be afraid to experiment and find papers that work for you. Paper choice can be personal, so I can only offer my paper suggestions with the expectation that they will work for you. You may see that I am partial to Clairefontaine, and it also comes in books, so if you're on the move, this might work for you. Also, if you are used to working with grids, you might really like this clear print translucent vellum which has a grid pattern. Grids are helpful if you want to create a symmetrical design. We'll set up a discussion about papers in the discussions area of this class so people can share other papers that they find work well. You might want to cut or tear your paper into smaller pieces to avoid smearing your previous work and to make the best use of your paper. Working on smaller pieces, you can set them aside to dry. You can also use a hairdryer set to low to speed the ink drying process. One final tip, sometimes the oil in our skin can affect paper as well, so it's a good idea to wash hands before you start. Also, use a guard sheet to protect work that has dried. So, gather your papers and I'll see you in the next class where the fun begins.